Currently, Earth.
On June 29th in 1613, the Globe Theatre, where most of William Shakespeare's plays had their debut, burned down. The Globe was built by Shakespeare's acting company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, in 1599 from the timbers of London's very first permanent theatre, Burbage Theatre, built in 1576. Before James Burbage built his theatre, plays and dramatic performances were ad hoc affairs, performed on street corners and in the yards of inns. The Common Council of London in 1574 started licensing theatrical pieces performed in Inns Yard within the city limits. To escape the restriction, actor James Burbage built his own theater on land he leased outside the city limits. When Burbage's lease ran out, the Lord Chamberlain's Men moved the timbers to a new location and created the Globe. Like other theaters of its time, the Globe was a round wooden structure with a stage at one end and covered balconies for the gentry. The galleries could seat about 1,000 people, with room for another 2,000 groundlings who could stand on the ground around the stage. The Lord Chamberlain's Men built Blackfriars Theatre in 1608, a smaller theatre that seated about 700 people to use in winter when the open-air Globe wasn't practical. On June 28th in 1776, Edward Rutledge, one of South Carolina's representatives to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, expresses his reluctance to declare independence from Britain in a letter to the like-minded John Jay of New York. Contrary to the majority of his congressional colleagues, Rutledge advocated patience with regards to declaring independence. In a letter to Jay, one of New York's representatives who was similarly disinclined to rush a declaration, Rutledge worried whether moderates like himself and Jay could effectually oppose a resolution for independence. Jay had urgent business in New York and therefore was not able to be present for the debates. Thus, Rutledge wrote his concerns. Rutledge was born in Charleston to a physician who had emigrated from Ireland. Edward's elder brother, John, studied law at London's Middle Temple before returning to set up a lucrative practice in Charleston. Edward followed suit and studied first at Oxford University before being admitted to the English bar at the Middle Temple. He too returned to Charleston, where he married and began a family in a house across the street from his brother. As revolutionary politics roiled the colonies, first John, then Edward served as South Carolina's representative to the Continental Congress. Neither Rutledge's brother was eager to sever ties with Great Britain, but it fell to Edward to sign the Declaration of Independence and create the appearance of unanimity to strengthen the Patriot stand. At age 26, Edward Rutledge was the youngest American to literally risk his neck by signing the document. On June 29th in 1958, Brazil defeats the host nation Sweden 5-2 to win its first World Cup. Brazil came into the tournament as a favorite and did not disappoint, thrilling the world with their spectacular play, which was often referred to as the beautiful game. The star of the tournament was an undersized midfielder named Edson Arantes do Nascimento, known the world over as Pelé. Edson, the son of a professional footballer called Dojinho, was named for the American inventor Thomas Edison. His mother, having watched her husband struggle to earn money in the game, discouraged Pelé from playing football. Pelé's will won out, and at 14, he was discovered by De Brito, a former Brazilian team member who took the young scorer under his wing. Pelé earned his first cap with the national team at 16 and made his debut on the international stage at the 1958 World Cup in Sweden at 17 years old. In that year's Cup, Pelé did not make an appearance until Brazil's third group play match against the Soviet Union, in which he set up a goal for Vava. His first goal came in the quarterfinal against Wales. It was the only goal Brazil scored in a 1-0 win. It was in the semifinal against France, though, that Pelé truly came into his own. As the crowd at Råsunda Stadium listened to the Sweden-West Germany game on their radios, Pelé put on a show of offensive brilliance against the second-best team in the tournament. He scored 3 goals from his left side and left the French team dumbfounded at their inability to contain a 17-year-old. Pelé and Vava scored 2 goals each in the final. Upon receiving the Jules Rimet Cup as the best team in the world, the entire team wept. On June 29th in 1974, Isabel Martínez de Perón, the then wife of the Argentinian president Juan Perón, is sworn in as the leader of Argentina. As President Juan Perón fell ill, his wife and Vice President Isabel Perón, a former dancer and Perón's third wife, was the Western Hemisphere's first female head of government. 2 days later, Juan continued his eternity, and Isabel was left alone as leader of a nation suffering from serious economic and political strife. In 1943, as an army officer, Juan Domingo Perón joined a military coup against Argentina's ineffectual civilian government. Appointed Secretary of Labor, his influence grew, and in 1944, he also became Vice President and Minister of War. In October 1945, Perón was ousted from his positions by a coup of constitutionally minded civilians and officers, and he was in prison. But appeals from workers and his charismatic mistress, Eva Duarte, soon forced his release. The night of his release, October 17th, he addressed a crowd of some 300,000 people from the balcony of the presidential palace and promised to lead the people to victory in the coming presidential election. 4 days later, Perón, a widower, married Eva Duarte. or Evita, as she became affectionately known. As president, Perón constructed an impressive populist alliance, and his vision of self-sufficiency for Argentina won him wide support. However, he also became increasingly authoritarian, jailing political opponents and restricting freedom of the press. In 1952, his greatest political resource, Evita, continued her eternity, and support for him dissolved. 3 years later, he was ousted in a military coup. In 1973, after 18 years of exile, he returned to Argentina and won the presidency again. His third wife, Isabel Martínez de Perón, was elected as vice president, and in 1974 succeeded him upon his continuance of eternity. President Isabel Perón was unable to command the support of any powerful group, let alone construct a necessary coalition, and the political and economic situation in Argentina worsened. On March 24, 1976, following a sharp rise in political terrorism and guerrilla activity, the military deposed Isabel Perón. They also instituted one of the bloodiest regimes in South American history. Isabel Perón was imprisoned for 5 years on a charge of abuse of property, and upon her release in 1981, settled in Madrid. In 2007, she was arrested in Spain in connection with the disappearance of an Argentinian activist in 1976, but the case was later dismissed. On June 29th in 1995, the American space shuttle Atlantis docks with the Russian space station Mir to form the largest man-made satellite ever to orbit the Earth. This historic moment of cooperation between former space rival programs was also the 100th human space mission in American history. At the time, Daniel Goldin, chief of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, called it the beginning of a new era of friendship and cooperation between the U.S. and Russia. With millions of viewers watching on television, Atlantis blasted off from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in eastern Florida on June 27, 1995. Just after 6 a.m. on June 29th, Atlantis and its 7 crew members approached Mir as both crafts orbited the Earth some 245 miles above Central Asia near the Russian-Mongolian border. When they spotted the shuttle, the 3 cosmonauts on Mir broadcast Russian folk songs to Atlantis to welcome them. Over the next 2 hours, the shuttle's commander, Robert Hoot Gibson, expertly maneuvered his craft towards the space station. To make the docking, Gibson had to steer the 100-ton shuttle to within 3 inches of Mir at a closing rate of no more than 1 foot every 10 seconds. The docking went perfectly and was completed at 8 a.m., just 2 seconds off the target arrival time and using 200 pounds less fuel than had been anticipated. Combined, Atlantis and the 123-ton Mir formed the largest spacecraft ever in orbit. It was only the second time ships from 2 countries had linked up in space. The first was in June 1975, when an American Apollo capsule and a Soviet Soyuz spacecraft briefly joined in orbit. Once the docking was completed, Gibson and Mir's commander, Vladimir Deshirov, greeted each other by clasping hands in a victorious celebration of the historic moment. A formal exchange of gifts followed, with the Atlantis crew bringing chocolate, fruit, and flowers, and the Mir cosmonauts offering traditional Russian welcoming gifts of bread and salt. Atlantis remained docked with Mir for 5 days before returning to Earth, leaving 2 fresh Russian cosmonauts on the space station. The 3 veteran Mir crew members returned with the shuttle, including 2 Russians and Norman Thagard, a U.S. astronaut who rode a Russian rocket to the space station in mid-March 1995 and spent over 100 days in space, a U.S. endurance record. NASA's Shuttle Mir program continued for 11 missions and was a crucial step towards the construction of the International Space Station, now in orbit. All historic information documented on this audio file can be verified on History.com.